And we're up and running. So how are you this morning, Barrett?
I'm hanging in there, Chris. Doing all right for this somewhat cloudy day that we have out here in the Midwest. How are you doing today?
Really good. We've got the southern edge of those clouds down here, and it's kind of a tranquil day. We have a new moon today, and that's also a period of planting seeds and preparing for the next big cycle to unfold. And the only thing that's somewhat murderous about that idea is that it's going to be pretty much like the last cycle. So, we just keep winding the clock up and watching it run down and then winding it up again. That seems to be the theme here on planet Earth.
Tick tock, right? The clock will never stop.
Yes, and that rabbit, that little white rabbit, is always checking his pocket watch, and he's very alert.
Oh, that reminds me, Chris. I have somewhere very important to be right now. So, oh, no, just kidding.
Okay, the Red Queen is calling, right? And you and Alice need to get your butt down that rabbit hole and check out the court.
Well,
Anyway,
yeah. I mean, I think Alice and these other, fantasy stories that kind of lead us into another realm that doesn't make any sense and everything's twisted and upside down. It's very revealing for our kind of discussion because really that's what we're saying is we've entered into a twisted world where everything is upside down, except for we've sort of gotten used to it and we call it normal.
well, that's the thing. We've become so brainwashed by the time we're 5 years old that we believe all this is real. But, if you're around little guys, little toddlers, who's 2 and 3 and 4, they still question all of this bullshit. And I think that's the joy of hanging out with kids is, they'll look at something and say, well, that's not real. And then, you immediately explain to them how, why, and if it's real. And so it is a brainwashing process once we are brought into this world. Otherwise, we become very, very vulnerable at a very early age, and that can get weird too.
Well, the good thing about all that brainwashing is it means our brains are very clean. So,
That's true. They're clean. It's unfortunate that the surroundings are not all that clean, but we're working on that step by step. So we were dialoguing about the undoing of fear, and fear is always, ground zero for the human experience. Everything here is perpetrated upon fear, and it's that little ego that is always concerned about itself. And it's interesting because where we left off last week, we were talking about um, the the ninth verse here. What you remembered never was. It came from causelessness, which you confused with cause. So, in other words, all of this is our machinations, and it's really not grounded in any kind of true reality, and that's why it's always in flux. That's why it's always changing. It's like speed reading through, one of the great novels like Moby Dick, and uh, coming to the realization that we've been chasing the great white whale all of our life, and it really, in truth, doesn't even exist.
yeah, the ego's version of the white whale is always something in your life that once you get it, you're going to be happy. So either it's a relationship or a certain number in your bank account, a house, a car, the right job, the right friend. All of these things are our white whales that we search for again and again and again. But like you just said, we're never really going to find it. And even if we seem to find it, then there's another white whale and there's another one, and our seeking and our hunting is never over. This feeling is really well expressed in the medieval story of Parsifal, the knight who would fight and fight and fight, and eventually he just wearied of the fighting. He won all the battles, but he was not happy. He was not fulfilled. And in the story, the knight only found peace by casting aside his armor and by throwing his sword into the lake. And I think that's a really good analogy for what ultimately we're doing on the spiritual path is, as the Course says so clearly, truth needs no defense, and that all of our defenses do what they would defend. In other words, the defense basically says you're justified in having a defense, that there is something to fear, that there is something you need protection from. And so a defense actually serves to fortify fear. And what we're working on doing is undoing the fear and realizing that there's no real need for defense, and that every time we get defensive, we're actually coming from a place of being vulnerable and being weak, and it's putting the lie to our truth that we have nothing to defend ourselves from.
Absolutely. It's a thing of living 10 billion lifetimes, winning every battle, but losing the war. And that is the outcome of all wars. So if we could get that realization grounded in our current circumstance here, it might help things calm down globally a little bit. So maybe we should work on that intention in our own private thoughts, our own private recognition of truth, is to realize that it's a war that cannot be won. So lay down your arms and walk away.
Yeah, and it's really, another way to describe it is a rigged game. But the thing is, it's not rigged by someone else. We rigged this game against ourselves. And the question then might become, well, why would I do that? Why would I set up a painful and challenging circumstance that doesn't seem to have any resolution? And on the deepest level, we come to see that we're actually afraid of melting into the oneness. We're afraid of knowing God's love so completely, because in God's love, there is no me. There is no Barrett, there is no Chris, there is no sense of individuality or specialness. And one part of us gets that and really wants that. It wants to know that truth. But the ego part of us is terrified of that. The ego part of us, that's like the worst possible outcome. So part of us fights this path tooth and nail. And anyone who's been practicing and studying Course in Miracles for a while knows that this is not a very easy path, that there are times where it might feel happy and joyful and smooth. But yeah, this is going to bring up all your fears. This is going to bring up all of your resistance and all of your defenses that ultimately we have to set down.
Exactly. And the ego itself is fascinating in that it always is creating, change and chaos and turmoil and upheaval. And when you listen to the ego and at the same time are, working with A Course in Miracles, that idea of going into the oneness and living in the ecstatic state becomes arguable from the ego's vantage point of, oh my God, how boring that would be. And that, I think, is one of the more subtle and yet more rigid circumstances we're dealing with in trying to undo the ego, is that we're having to look at that idea of having a circus and populating it with flying monkeys and then imagining a world where that doesn't exist. And of course that puts a little stress into our thought process, that causes us to say, oh my God, I could never live like that. I've got to have something to watch. I've got to have something to be my source of entertainment or amusement or engagement. And so we really have to diminish that ego on an hour by hour basis.
Yeah, yeah. Every time we notice that we're slipping into some sort of judgment or fear, that becomes our opportunity to say, I want peace instead of this. And in every moment there is a way to have peace. So the question becomes, how do we do that more and more consistently? And this section really has some great messages for us. It's talking about in this line how we remember that crazy circus that you're talking about, Chris. What you're remembering would witness to is but the fear of God. He has not done the thing you fear, no more have you. And really, what the thing is that we fear is we fear that we have pulled away from oneness. We've pulled away from heaven. And whether in our telling of the story we say God is the one that rejected us, or whether we say that we're the one that has rejected God, he's saying, He has not done the thing you fear, no more have you. And so your innocence has not been lost. You need no healing to be healed. And that's quite a profound statement. I think what he's saying here is that we are already healed, and that within the temporal experience, it does look like, sure, we have more forgiveness to do, we have more judgment to release, we have more peace to claim as our truth. But in reality, that is all complete, that you are already whole and one and safe in heaven. And I think the more we remember that, the more reassured we are, which goes right into the next line. In quietness, see in the miracle a lesson in allowing cause, capital C cause, to have its own effects and doing nothing that would interfere. So our work becomes in letting go of everything that would stand between ourselves and our awareness of capital T truth. And every time we notice something that comes up, a little bit of pain, a judgment, wishing something in our lives were different than how it is, really what we're saying is that peace is not here right now. And we just continually hand that bit of non-peace over to spirit and let it go. And over time, we come consistently into that state of knowing that we are what we have been looking for. We are that peace that we've always been wanting.
Exactly. And, you know, in a large way, uh, Jesus is the primary factor in the journey. And a lot of people don't necessarily comprehend what that means. So, when you look at it from the level of ego, in order to exist in this world, in order to exist in this reality, we have to have an ego. Well, unfortunately, most of us have 99.99% of the time ego that's going full blast. But if we look at the ego that Jesus utilized in those final passages when he was on the planet, it was the most benign and the most loving and the most forgiving ego that has ever existed. And that's why all of the teachings that come out of, fundamental Christianity are about the idea of giving our ego, our personal sense of me as Chris or you as Barrett, up, diminishing that ego and embracing or stepping into or becoming one with that least causative, least abusive ego that has ever walked the planet, and that is the ego of Jesus. So if we're in that journey of surrendering and trying to allow ourselves to experience that union with Jesus, that opens that door for the greater experience of the Christ to become much more immediately available. So it really is an interesting process, because you really can't, I shouldn't say you can't, but it is hugely difficult to try and refine your own ego to the point that Jesus had refined his. So what we're going to do is just chip away at our own personal ego and try to embrace more and more of the identity of Jesus until at last that last sliver that is holding us back from becoming one with God and with the Christ is confronted and resolved in our favor. And that's a big point that a lot of people don't really get about what the whole thing about Jesus is. It's not like, when we imagine Jesus as the Lord and Master, it's not like he walks into the room with a whip and cane turns us into tamed lions. It is a process of our giving allowance to the fact that the ego we have crafted in this lifetime is hugely flawed. So the ideal is to embrace that one ego that had attained such a very high level of spiritual evolution.
Yeah, I agree. We're really training our ego, and then at the very end, we do let the ego be undone completely. There's that line from the Gospel of Thomas about how there was a weed that was planted outside of the Father's kingdom, outside of the kingdom's walls, but that the weed will be pulled up by the root and will wither away and be gone. And so that's really what we're doing is we are kind of like saying no to the ego, chipping away at it again and again and again. And then at the very end, Jesus says God takes the last step. So God kind of welcomes us into that oneness of heaven once we have found a place that is so peaceful, because we just don't want anything the ego is selling. Ego is sort of like if you were walking through a market and there was a vendor who was really being loud and obnoxious and selling all of his wares. But beware of these wares, because if you listen to it and you kind of get hooked in, there's a certain logic to it. There's a certain appeal to it. But every time you buy one of these ego gifts, ego goodies, it always comes with a really bad aftertaste. And that's what we find is every time we've tried to find happiness here in the world, it really always comes with some sort of downfall or crash. And so we just have to continue to realize when we're doing that it's not going to give us what we want. It's not going to bring us the peace, the happiness, or the harmony. So I think going down a couple more paragraphs, it fits in with this idea too. He says, "He to whom time is given offers thanks for every quiet instant given him. For in that instant is God's memory allowed to offer all its treasures to the Son of God, for whom they have been kept. How gladly does he offer them unto the one for whom he has been given them. And his Creator shares his thanks, because he would not be deprived of his effects. The instant silence that his Son accepts gives welcome to eternity and him, and lets them enter where they would abide. For in that instant does the Son of God do nothing that would make himself afraid." So saying no to the ego is really the same as saying yes to God. As he says here in this moment, when we give ourselves that moment of silence, when we rest in that ever-present always that is deep within us, then we are giving that eternal gift to ourselves and to God and to everyone, because we are not separate. We are all one. And it's that's the path of continuing to say no to the ego's offers that never really give us what they promise. And then as we do that, we're automatically saying yes to the Holy Spirit's gifts, which are eternally ours and everyone's.
Right, and that goes back to the idea of the ecstatic experience. Imagine living in an ongoing state of bliss to the degree that it would be beyond any human experience that has ever been attained. And you were talking about that weed that fell outside the kingdom of God, and I think in our prevailing society, it seems like a lot of people are not just observing the weed, but they're picking it, drying it, and smoking it. And so and they're hoping that they're going to get something joyous out of that. And unfortunately, you can blank the slate for only so long, but eventually all of the problems that living in this realm engenders are going to sneak up on you and demand to be resolved. And so I think it probably is appropriate to uproot the weed and not imbibe it, but just let go of it and move on.
That's right. We want to clear that fog of smoke that's hanging around our heads so that we can start to see clearly. And it's a process. I think there's a beautiful workbook lesson in the Course where Jesus talks about us feeling as though we're lost in the fogs of uncertainty and pain. And he gives this beautiful metaphor of just taking his hand, that if we just take his hand, we don't even have to see where we're going, but he will lead us out of the fog. He will lead us out of the cloud and back into the light. And sometimes that's all we can do. If we're in a tough spot, is just to say, Jesus, help me. I need a loving perspective here. I'm struggling to find that, but I know that you will show it to me. And to just say that can really open something up for us.
Oh, I will attest to that. I have, on numerous occasions, but one very clearly I can remember in Colorado many, many years ago, driving through an area where the fog was literally so thick I couldn't see the hood ornament on the end of the car. And I reached out in my consciousness and said, okay, Jesus, I need somebody to be, the passenger that can see what I can't see. And I mean, I literally felt a presence in the seat next to me. And I think that's one of the things that we can physically experience. We can feel that presence in a very visceral way. And that really is one of the rewards of starting to allow that companion, Yeshua ben Joseph, who was around 2,000 years ago. If we give the opportunity to him to become more manifest in our life, you will feel that presence, and I can guarantee that.
Yeah, I can too. Maybe we should do a talk on our experiences with Jesus, because we could probably go a lot more into this. But yeah, ask for his help, and you will get some guidance, some experience, some benefit, something that helps.
Something will manifest, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Barrett, you've got things to do and places to go, and I need to go watch the dog fart in the backyard. So we can wind it down, but we do have a live event coming up in October, so people should try to have that. What is it? That would be the second Sunday in the month, October 9th, to consider coming down to Alsip and hanging out with us. I think that would be a good thing, to have a whole gaggle of people down there waddling around like geese and talking about A Course in Miracles.
And maybe we'll play Duck Duck Goose too. So
that's more than just a slight possibility.
All right. Well, it was great talking to you today, Chris.
It was, in fact, and we'll be back in 1 week, and who knows, we may be talking about how that manifestation has occurred on multiple occasions in our lives. That would be a good romp.
Sounds fun. Looking forward to it. Well, be well, Chris. Have a good week.
You as well. Bye.
Bye.